what's the matter? You know I got you on my mind. You got the power to make me happy. Oh, see me now, she cries.
It's my privilege to introduce Andy Pemrich. Andy Pemrich is a musician, singer, and record collector. He was raised in Menasha. He went to Menasha High School. I asked him whether he had graduated from Menasha High School, and he said something about, what was that, 2000?
Class of 2000.
So he wasn't there in 1971, 50 years ago when I was teaching there. But he has been surrounded by music his entire life. He began his fascination with record and recorded sound as a toddler and took up guitar around age 12. He currently plays in 2 local bands and curates a private collection of over 8,000 vinyl records. He lives in Neenah with his wife Jessica and their 2 dogs, Caboose and Ozark. Andy's offering tonight is Target Productions, TP Records, and the Vanishing History of Fox Valley Recorded Rock. The presentation will highlight the history of Fox Valley Recording Studio Target Productions, its artists, its place in the scope of Wisconsin and American pop and rock history, as well as Andy's effort to preserve its lasting legacy for future generations of local artists, historians, and music lovers. Photos, film clips, and audio of recording artists, studio members, and venues will illustrate this look at a fading piece of Wisconsin history. Please, a warm welcome for Andy Pemrich.
Good evening. Thank you all so much for coming out in this weather. It is still terrible out, right? Yeah. Thought so. Before I begin, I just wanted to check again what my estimated time to speak is going to be about.
We have to be out of here by 9 o'clock, no later, so you got
okay. Curfew? Someone's got to be in bed? We can do that. I'll do my best to be brief and succinct. I've never done this before. I started this project on a whim by chance in 2014, and I'll get to the context of that as I go through the things I have to share with everybody. So first, I'd like to thank the Appleton's Historical Society for allowing me to come in and share this with everybody. For everybody that isn't here, I want to thank them for the contributions that they made to local history, to this music, to this community, and just to say a few words for them, especially the ones that we have lost over the last few years, and I'll try to mention them towards the end of the show. Again, I'm nervous. Target Productions was opened in early 1966 in Appleton, Wisconsin by 2 members of a band called the Catalinas, Al Posniak and James Kelly. The label ran for 6 years until 1972 when it was sold to one of the artist and repertoire men, and ran for a few more years as DBL Enterprise when it folded. I should probably turn the switch on. Just a couple things in case anybody's ever recognized this in a stack of old records. It would have been red. The label operated under the name Target Records as well as TP Records. Originally, the intent was that Target Productions would also rep artists, have people undersigned to do things like radio jingles, and artists that would be visiting from other areas or just recording to get a record out would be released under TP, and it did not really go that way. Eventually, almost everything came out under TP, so it's the much more well-known of the label family. I would like to start with a quick piece of music, if I could. This is as I received it, so. And again, you'll have to excuse the skips. Does anybody here remember the country air? Who here has been to the country air? This was recorded just before Christmas, 1969 at the country air. This is the Friends from Oshkosh. One of their singers, Larry Wolf, passed away a few years ago, and his son Nathan has been assisting me in saving some of their photographs, posters, and they had 2 discs that were cut from a rehearsal for their concert, the Christmas Eve show, the only copy in the world. I do have all of the pieces that skip. It's very much a jigsaw puzzle trying to put this back together, but eventually this will be available online, fully restored. The other things I'll be playing you are in-progress restorations from the records that I own. They all sound much better than this. But I just wanted to give you a quick example of some of the things that I've run across. These are the 4 variants of labels that they released records under. They started in the early period. There are 5 or 6 releases on these very basic yellow labels, and they also launched the TP label, where most of the records came from. In 1969, they switched to a little more bold design, and then towards the end, around 1971, they switched to this, which ran for the last year until they closed. Just as an example of what's out there, in case you're ever flipping through boxes at a rummage sale and you see any of these, grab them. It's something that as I started researching and talking to other collectors, not only in Wisconsin, but also in other states and in other countries, one thing that has come up time and time again is the percentage of fantastic music that came out of this town and the artists that recorded at Target Productions versus almost anywhere else in the country. It's absolutely true. I mean, obviously my opinion is biased, but there's far more amazing recordings than things that you would pass along. And again, I'll highlight a few of those as I talk. Target didn't spring out of nowhere. The one thing that seems to have kind of sprung out of nowhere is rock and roll. This is a photo of College Avenue in the late 1950s. And it was in this environment that a group of high school students from Appleton who started a band called the Whitecaps, in homage to Gene Vincent's group, the Blue Caps, drove to Wausau and recorded Wisconsin's first rock and roll record in January of 1957. And that is rock and roll songs.
Well, I went to a dance in the other night. The bandit was a rockin' to the left and to the right. I sure got a shock as I walked to the left. I saw the rock and roll saddle bumping across the floor. Well, a rock and roll saddle, wide and black. A rock and roll saddle with a buckle on the back.
The manager was a DJ from WAPL. And there are 5 guys in this picture. 4 of them drove to the gig. And the gentleman that recorded them filled in his spot on bass. That man was Duke Wright. His family owned a music store. As near as I can figure, I did it with my mind. Duke's Music Store was well known. They started a small private recording studio kind of set up for him and his polka interests. But they also started recording other local acts, and theirs was actually the second single released on the label. Duke went on to make it very, very big in Wisconsin radio, and he is still around. One thing I want to point out, because this is going to come back a few times, the young gentleman here on the end, this is Ricky Lee Smolinski. If anybody's ever heard the name Ricky Lee, at 15, his guitar teachers couldn't teach him anything. He had outpaced all of his teachers, was studying Chet Atkins, and he wrote both sides of their single and played lead guitar. He factors incredibly heavily into the story of Appleton's rock and roll history, writing and producing several records on Target, lots of bands that never recorded. We've got photographic history of some of the groups he's played with. And that is the first copy that I could get my hands on. Certainly not the one that is sourced from, but this was 1958. So after a few lineup changes, the Whitecaps were opening for Johnny Cash in Oshkosh. And that happened more than once. Johnny, if you go to official websites for Johnny Cash, shows his entire itinerary for his entire career. And he actually came through Wisconsin multiple times in the 50s. There are photographs of him playing in Wausau. Came to the Eagles Ballroom in Oshkosh a few times in late 58. And our guys were there. They actually filled in as the opening band, and I believe they played on a few songs. As time moved forward, this is from 1960. Splinters of that band and other groups that had started slowly were putting out recordings. It's not a cheap process. It wasn't then, it isn't now. But this is the label from Jerry Williams and the Rockets' Blueberry Lane, an instrumental cover of Blueberry Hill. Jerry's band was playing all the way into the early 90s, and a lot of familiar names that come up in the history that I do also went through his band. And there's another picture of Ricky. And this is the later lineup of the Whitecaps. The gentleman on the far left with the jazz master is a young man named Bob Timmers. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Timmers family.
Yes, the printing company.
Same. Bob and his father and brother started the Bargain Bulletin in 1964.
Yeah.
Later on in life, Bob was in tons of bands around here, well-respected guitarist, massive fan of rockabilly, and in the 1980s he moved to Nashville and launched the Rockabilly Hall of Fame. Bob Timmers, internationally renowned. He, as in his dreams, he actually got to be a member of the Blue Caps in the 1980s for a little bit. Bob had an absolute passion for rock and roll and continued to play his entire life. He actually just passed away last month. So just a few quick pictures of some of the other groups in the area. This is a group consisting mostly of guys from Oshkosh. There's a group called the Phaetons. What we do have, though, are two gentlemen. This is Roger Lose, and this is his brother Tom. We're going to hear them again in a little bit. And then there's these four guys. This is the Catalinas in 1962. We got Bob Dix, Harry Wheelock, Jim Kelly, Bobby Dix, and Alan Posniak. Band formed in about 1960, 1961 at UW Oshkosh, and within a year had already made their first record. In late 1958, a studio in Sauk City opened up, much more well-known, Kuka. If you wanted to make a record in 1961, you had to drive to Sauk City. There wasn't anybody else doing it. And James Kirchstein, who started the label, was absolutely dedicated to the craft. His original intention was to record old world music that people had brought through immigration, old Swiss folk music, polkas, schottisches, things like that. But what he also did was he allowed local rock bands to come and record, and he wouldn't charge them. If you wanted to release a record from the tape that you had, that's where your money went. But if you wanted to come in and track a song, you could do that. Lots and lots of bands from Wisconsin in the early 60s released records under Kuka's family of labels. And we've also managed to get some of those together because they relate directly or indirectly to Target. The lead vocal on this song, Crazy Twisted Baby, is Al. It's the only recording of his voice that I currently have. This is 1961, maybe early 1962. Now at this same time, we had a young man that was getting quite famous for his singing and his voice and his face. And that would be Denny Noy.
Denny what?
Noy, N-O-I-E.
Okay.
And there's Ricky Lee again. Denny was fronting several bands, also working as a solo artist. This is one of their groups, and this is footage of, I believe this is either the In Crowd or Kenny King and the Bebops. This was transferred by Jeff Yeager. And it's just fascinating to not only see these kids in motion, but in color.
You said that was your brother?
That's the drummer.
Mm-hmm. Daryl, yep. Daryl Yeager right there. These things exist. And it blows my mind every time they come out of the woodwork, but anytime things like this show up, it's just magical to me, knowing that these little bits of time aren't lost. They're just hiding somewhere. So in 1965, Denny teamed up with the Catalinas and put out a single. Spent the extra money to fold together and glue up some sleeves for them. This is from a friend's collection. I do not have one of these. And recorded a song about his girlfriend.
Where was Night Records?
Night Records wasn't anywhere. I call it Night Records Target Beta. One of the clubs that was very popular at the time was The Night. And the best I can figure is this is either named for the club, because they played there often, or was possibly funded by the owners of the club partially as promotion. And then we've got,
Where did they press the records?
Until about 1966, almost all of the records were pressed in Phoenix, Arizona. There was a facility called Wakefield Manufacturing, independent record pressing facility. You would send your tapes down to them. They would cut what's called an answer lacquer, which is a blank disc. They would cut a groove into of the recording, send it back to you and say, this is what your music will sound like on record. Does it sound okay? You tell them yes, they go ahead and they press the record. By about 1966, it became easier to contract through RCA. Lots and lots of labels actually didn't press their own records back then, and certainly not now. You would contract with a pressing facility like you would go to a printer or anything else, and they will manufacture your product.
Did Kuka press their own?
Kuka did. That was one of the fascinating things is Jim was so dedicated to making a good product and having full control over it that he bought presses and printers and made his own discs, his own labels, his own jackets until about the late 60s, and then he started slowly farming it back out to larger facilities. But yeah, we did in some instances have fully Wisconsin-made records in the state for a while. So again, this is another group from the mid-60s with Denny and Ricky again. This is the 13th Hour. One of the things that I've been doing to kind of just gather data is scour by hand, literally, the newspaper archive of the National Library. Many libraries obviously went to microfiche, and now you can go on newspapers.com and look at scans of things. I'll tell you right now, there is nothing like paging through an old newspaper, and they have 50 years bound in their basement. I'll get to some of the details of how I handle that, but the things you find are ads for teen clubs that don't exist anymore and bands you've never heard of. They would come up every Friday in the mid to late 60s. Every Friday you could, like clockwork, flip past the movie ads, and there'd be all the little blurbs of all the clubs, who was playing, and where. So 1965, 1966, in comes the gimmick. The Catalinas go golden. I can tell you where they had their hair dyed. I cannot tell you why. But for a brief period, the whole band went bleach blonde in gold lame suits. This was from a short period where they had a female co-lead, and right after this period, they brought in the saxophone player from the earlier picture, Roger Lowe's. Again, I'll get you another sample of where the sound of the Fox Valley is moving. This is the Badger Beat.
Well, there's a swinging place in the United States, way up in the low country, where those bright lights shine, your long hair hangs fine, and the sound knocks out your teeth. Well, it's a Badger Beat.
It was recorded in the basement of Concerto Music on the corner of 47 and Prospect. With the demand of the band explosion of the Beatles playing on Ed Sullivan, the Rolling Stones, the huge pop surge in the mid-'60s that created the drive for kids to go buy guitars and beg their parents to release a Vox Continental organ or a Farfisa or some drums, oh heaven forbid. Al and Jim decided that entrepreneurship was probably preferable to the extended tours that they were doing, not only in Wisconsin, but down the East Coast and into Florida. So while they didn't completely retire the Catalinas, they certainly took their leave of it part-time. And what they did was paired up with friends at Concerto. Vic Wendt, the owner, allowed them to wall up the basement and create a live room and a studio room. They recruited a recent graduate from Lawrence, Marty Jensen, as an engineer. He was the local Fender amp repairman, a guitarist in his own right, as their studio engineer, and started recording in the basement of the music store. The Pharaohs were one of their first artists. They were represented by Gary Van Zeeland. Family to the auto repair folks. Gary was a musician in the early 60s in a band called the Echoes. So he named his group Echo Enterprises, and for the next 20 years, he represented artists throughout the Fox Valley. Yes?
Can you name the Pharaohs?
I can tell you one of them is Gary Daly. I don't have all their names off the top of my head, but I do have a large list of books and can get you names of any artists that show up on here. More story time. One of the funnier things that I discovered as I started researching Target in 2014, 2015 was the story of Lord Beverly Moss. And the first thing I read was a band from Appleton put an ad in a British music rag looking for a singer that sounded like Eric Burdon that would come to the United States and front a band. And it's true. They found Bev Moss, a young 20-something who was digging ditches and graves part-time and singing part-time, paid for his trip over, boarded him, and toured him for a year until his visa ran up, and then he went home. The ads that I have claim he's from Liverpool and everything else. That would be a hot buzzword for a band in 1966 with a British singer. He's not. He's a Yorkshireman. This was also recorded in the basement of Concerto Music.
Please, what's the matter? You know I got you on my mind. You got the power to make me happy. Oh, see me now, she cry. I want you to tell me what's the matter with you. Oh, baby, what's the matter? You got trouble on the brain. Too many people hanging around you, baby. You know you got yourself to blame. I want you to tell me, girl, what's the matter with you?
So this band has Bob Timmers on guitar and Gary Lobbs on bass. Gary was in several bands and was also the treasurer for the local musicians union. We were unionized back then, and we got a lot better gigs. In fact, with all these clubs and bars that we did have at the time, a lot of them would not bring in groups that weren't union. This is just one of the example of the namesake of my website. The website is called Rockin' Around the Valley. And what you can find there are things like this article, the audio that I'm playing here, and another related news. This was a weekly music article in the Post-Crescent. Came out on Fridays opposite the band ads. Generally started just as a local interest, what's happening in the music scene. For the most part, you would see upcoming stories about bands from the area, visiting musicians. We did have a lot of large groups come through and play the area. The Everly Brothers were here several times. The Turtles, the New Colony Six came many times. And they would get reported in this short piece. Al started it. He did it for a few months and eventually moved full-time to the Milwaukee area when he handed it off to his younger brother Chuck, who was in a band called the Memories. And the frame poster over here on my your left, my right, is an original Memories poster. It's the very first piece of anything that I found that specifically says Target Productions on it, and it has their home address listed as the facility. They were advertised as Wisconsin's own Rolling Stones because their hair was probably about half an inch longer than mine. And one of the things, if it sounds familiar to anybody, is they were apparently threatened with expulsion from school for their hair. Not uncommon at the time, and I'm still searching, but apparently it was in the paper, so when I find it, I am definitely posting it. Again, another article. This shows the Shags. Everybody says that they're from Madison. They were from Nakusa, but this again would just show what was going on in the scene that week. Upcoming gigs, things happening around the area. It was also kind of slyly used to advertise some of Target's artists, but that generally didn't last after Al left the area. The 60s were definitely a time of change in society and definitely in music. And just within a year, the idea of the party band was definitely shifting away. Guys like the Kingsmen, frat bands, definitely weren't the hot ticket item anymore. So just going through to see some of the shift in pop music culture. This is from the Post-Crescent, just a blurb about kids that were at a Los Angeles court and threatened to get kicked out of the courtroom because of their hair. And that was 1965. We have a few of the other artists that recorded for Target in the mid-60s as things started to get a little, I suppose, fuzzier, more psychedelic. This is the Syndicate of Sound from Oshkosh. And we also actually have footage of them. They recorded a single in Minneapolis under the name of the Cobblers. And that, I believe, is the backing playing on this audio, but this is them playing around 1966.
I was smoking at the half note. A cop knocks on the door. Said, "What's that thing?"
If anybody has 8mm film reels in their basement or their attic, anything like this, please let me know.
I
know it's dark, I know it's choppy, I know that that's been to a rock and roll show, their brain is filling in all those frames right now. And remember what this is like.
Treat you with good behavior, but I'm gonna get out, if only to see my baby.
So some more things I found as I went through the newspapers. The Psychedelic Syndrome at the Ivanhoe is not a band or movie. It is an LSD experience. That would have been about 1967. Another band that recorded at Target was from Milwaukee. This is the Coachmen. I've got a selection of these. I'm always on the hunt watching for these. These photographs are actually promotional 8x10s. So they'll have a band name on it, obviously a picture of the group, but what they'll have is contact information showing who their representatives are, who they record for, things like that. JK Productions is Jim Kelly. 315 Blue Mound Drive in Appleton was where Target was at the time. And that is currently the Mason Lodge by McDonald's. In early 1967, Target moved from the basement of Concerto to 109 North Douglas Street. And they were there for roughly a year before they picked up the facility on Blue Mound, which was being used by a photo studio previously. They stayed there until late 1970. Again, more context for the era, not just from around here, but of course nationwide. As kids were going off to Vietnam, bands were being recruited all over the place to go play in the USO. And that included local bands like Terry Lee and the Sonics and the She Five. Also, the Jules Blattner group went over several times to entertain soldiers, and I've got photographs of bands and even soldiers that took their instruments with them and started bands. Not everybody that recorded at Target was from Wisconsin. Through the connections that the artists had with other bands from their touring, from their management teams, word got out that if you were coming through the area and wanted to do something like this, there was a studio to record at. The Knights of Day were from Nebraska. They recorded a single here, and I'm assuming a lot of them went back with them, but they still show up from time to time. There was a band later on, towards the end of the lifespan of the label, from Missouri. Gentle Thud was from, do I need to go back to the LSD frame? Gentle Thud was from the Fond du Lac area. There's also Bare Blue Water, The Elements of Sound, Love Society from Plymouth. So, interesting thing about the Love Society. They released a single through TP that they were able to get placed with Scepter Records for national play. Scepter took them on for a second single, and that was released in France. That one didn't do as well, so they came back here, recorded another single on Target, placed it with RCA, did 2 more singles for RCA, went to Chicago, recorded a whole album, which is lost. Came back here, and then recorded for Mercury. And after they split up, they reformed and became,
Sunblind Line.
that's right, Sunblind Lion, who are still playing. Little anecdote, I saw them just before the COVID outbreak. I went out to Cascade to see Sunblind Lion play. They played a 3-hour show.
How old are they?
Yeah, they gotta be old.
They're older than me.
How old are
I'd hope so. You're my mom. They're in their early 70s.
Wow.
Now that's not the amazing part. Like I said, they played a 3-hour show
That's amazing.
of original music,
Wow.
all original music.
Wow.
The audience sang along for the entire show. And then they played an encore by request and played one cover song. It was transcendent. And I mean no hyperbole. It was one of the most amazing things I've seen a band do. They're all still active musicians. Dave Steffen has several bands. It's hard not to page through The Entertainer or anywhere else and not see one of his acts actively still playing. The Purple People. This one's fun. So in my research, I found an old article where someone had talked to Al Posniak about a grand stunt, something that would, get attention. And he thought about bringing a band out in a flying saucer. 7 years later, he did it. He had a band that changed their name, changed their look, and he premiered them in public coming out of a giant spaceship. You can't talk about Appleton music, you can't talk about Target Records, and you honestly can't talk about Wisconsin rock and roll if you don't talk about Soup. Soup started in a spare bedroom of teenagers under the name The Strangers with a very determined kid that loved music named Doug Yankus. The Strangers became private property of Digil. Ask me later, I'll explain it. And then it became private property, and then it fell apart, and then Soup happened. Soup was, by all accounts, one of the most amazing musical acts to ever come out of Wisconsin. Doug was an incredible guitarist, an amazing songwriter. Hendrix was afraid of him. Hendrix actually told management that he did not want to follow him. Clapton saw him play. They played a lot. Eventually, they did even well enough to endorse Sun Amps. They played Soundstorm. Everybody talks about Woodstock. Everybody talks about Altamont. Those things happened in a lot of places. If Wisconsin had a Woodstock, it was Soundstorm. It happened in April of 1970 in Poynette in front of roughly 250,000 people. It was a 3-day show, and Soup, among a bunch of other Wisconsin and national acts. The Grateful Dead played a 6-hour concert, and it's famously one of the few recordings that fans don't have. The Wisconsin Historical Society has photographs covering the first people coming to set up the show through the last people leaving and scraping up the cans. It's absolutely fascinating. You can go right on their website and see the entire concert in stills. Soup was legitimately famous. This picture was posted in the New York Daily News in 1972. This was from an interview with John Lennon and Yoko Ono in their apartment in Greenwich Village, watching the cartoons, playing guitar, drinking some coffee, and listening to some music they liked, including Soup's album. So they weren't for nothing. That album, by the way, was recorded in one day. And it's worth every second you listen to it. It's absolutely killer. This is Eddie Hansen. I don't have a lot to say about Eddie at the moment. Waupaca Historical Society could tell you so much more and do it so much better. Eddie was an organist. He grew up in New London and Neenah. He played in Sousa's band, traveled, wrote rag music in the 30s. In his older age, came back here and taught organ lessons in Appleton on Memorial Drive. He did 3 albums that Target recorded for him and released through the organ studio, Al Rollo's Kimball Organ Studio. I recently finished restoring those recordings for the Waupaca Area Historical Society, and they're displaying those along with sheet music and interviews that they have from his personal estate this month.
Is that at the Waupaca Historical Society?
Yes, the Waupaca Historical Society. He passed away at the Veterans Home in King. His father actually helped build it. This is a story about everybody, so obviously it's also a story about me. The band isn't me. Way better than I ever will be. That was me. I was born in Appleton in 1982. I grew up in Menasha, and my entire life I've been just handling records. I think one of the first substantial toys I was given was 2 5-quart ice cream pails of 45s that belonged to my parents when they were teenagers in the 70s. I can still go through the quoted thousands of records that I own and tell you which ones they are. Shopko, 1986. That's me at 5. All my friends were 7 inches tall and had 2-inch holes in the middle. And for the most part, it hasn't changed. I still spend so much of my time with my music. DJ'd one of my mom's reunions. That's my brother. If you drive up Memorial, just past Eldorado's, across the street from the Secura building, there's this little dilapidated thing in the corner. One side of it used to be a plumbing business. The other side was where I took my first guitar lessons. I think I took 2 there before it rained and the ceiling was coming in. But I haven't stopped playing since then. That's high school. That's further into high school, my hair grew back. And this is about 10 years ago with my brother. We gave the M&M in Little Chute. I spent 4 open mic nights in a row in December playing Pink Floyd's The Wall cover to cover on acoustic guitar. I do have the 4th night on tape somewhere. By the way, the band you're listening to is the Torquays from Oshkosh. Nobody in that recording was over 17. That was the Friends. They formed in middle school and recorded that prior to transitioning into being friends. one thing I would like to share is about Dave Wagner. Does anybody recognize the name David Wagner besides his family? In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Dave was the album critic for the Post-Crescent. So if you read album reviews out of the Post-Crescent and that guided what you bought and what you listened to, that was Dave. Dave was my wife's uncle. He passed away in 2016, and it fell upon his family to go through his things, and that's when I discovered Dave wrote for the paper. Dave wrote for lots of papers. Dave wrote under pseudonyms. Before he wrote under his own name, he was writing as Jingo. Strikes a few, yeah. He wrote for several years under the pen name of Jingo, writing arts critiques, local interest pieces, and TV reviews. That's the thing, yep. And as he started writing for other papers, he picked more names. He wrote for the Kaleidoscope under the name Darwin DeBasker. I believe I found some things he wrote under a female pseudonym just to, write more. Yes, sir.
Didn't he sign by Jingo?
He did.
That's the one, yeah.
That's the guy right there. These are wonderful. Every one of them, at least for the first 2 years, has a little cartoon of the character kind of emoting to go along with the article. I've got dozens. One thing I found just last week, and this is after 4 years of looking at this stuff, was Jingo reporting on the Catalinas bleaching their hair. So not only do I have primary source, but I've got primary source from family. These have been absolutely indispensable in telling the story of everything that happened in the area, because no one else wrote it down. So if it wasn't Al or Chuck, it would have been him. There was one Sunday supplement in 1970 where they actually went to the studio while they were recording and took some pictures of some artists recording and of the people that were running the operation, and did a little center spread inside the color supplement. One thing that I've started doing this year, now that I can get back into the library more, is rescanning all of this material, because so much of it was originally done with my phone. And the problem with that, obviously, is resolution and fitting it all on there and then taking it off the phone and dealing with all that. And also having to do it in sections. So it's very hard to organize it all. The new scanner I have, which is an overhead, almost like a desk lamp, allows me to take full pages at once, which lets me keep track of the days and the dates and everything else, and then grab all the other ads too. Which sometimes will yield more information and sometimes just be fun. Hey, Operation Snafu was playing with Sean Connery. Hey, Godzilla versus whatever was playing. Yeah, they're truly fascinating. So I started a website. I call it Rockin' Around the Valley, just in recognition of the article, of the artists. This is the banner you'll find at the top of the page. It also functions as a blog. As I've been parsing through all this information, and I'm still scanning things, I haven't finished 1966. On the best of days, it takes an hour to get through a month of Post-Crescents. But as I find interesting pieces to fill in little gaps in the story, I post them online. I cross-post them to Facebook, and that also goes to Instagram. When you go to the website, you'll find dated listings to go through all those previous stories. There's also a full music archive. Target released roughly 70 singles and 1 album in 6 years. In 2017, this is what I had amassed. It now fills a large tote, and I am 3 records short. I am missing 3 singles to complete the entire library of recorded output. But through other collectors, incredibly generous people, and a gentleman that I've never actually spoken to in New Jersey, we have audio from every one of them. You can go right to the website and listen to any song they put out. Additionally, anything that those artists put out on other labels are also there. As I've been restoring some live recordings, the Friends, Johnny Bongers and the Nashville Sound from Oshkosh, Purple People, an old Purple People tape. As those are getting fixed up, those are also being made available. You can go on my website, spend 8 hours listening to music constantly and not hear one repeated piece of audio. We've recently started a Patreon campaign. I am operating this as a sole entity. I've been doing this since 2013. It's come entirely out of our pocket at home. The plan long term is to turn all of this over to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Once the collection is completed and everything has been cataloged and organized, it'll be added to the Wisconsin Music Archive at the Mills Library. I've already spoken with them several times, and I've already donated several full boxes of records, tapes, CDs, 8 tracks, and reel-to-reel tapes of Wisconsin music, including high school Christmas concert bands, esoteric Christian artists from the 70s that, felt like putting a record out in the state, bands that I've been in. Friends bands from college, and they'll take every last piece of it. They want every bit they can get for what they have. Speaking of KUKA, they are actually holders of all of KUKA's holdings. Jim, who's still alive, actually gave them all of his paperwork. He kept immaculate ledgers, photographs, all his master recordings. The University of Madison Mills Library is curating and taking care of all of it. And this will be added to that. This is what my day off last week looked like. These are not quite to scale, but close. Those are the bound Appleton Post Crescents at the Menasha Library for Monday through Saturday, April, May, and June, 1966. This is the kind of thing that I have to deal with constantly. They're bound, so they have a binding curvature to them, and sometimes things are printed on the edge of the paper. What's going to happen with these as I collect all, they're all being transcribed. My wife and I are going to be sitting down and retyping every one of these articles.
God.
Oh my God.
Every one. So that they're searchable. I want this to be an accessible database, so people can find out about the musicians that were around here. They can find out about bands that played in the area. They can, do keyword searches and find all the links to where this artist went from this band to this band to that band. Phone books. Phone books are a lot more fun than you'd think. This is from the 1971 phone book, and it was the last listing for Target Productions. In 1970, they built a new facility out on what was North Lake Street in the town of Neenah. And were there for about a year and a half. In 1972, Al, who was still operating that, fell ill with a brain tumor. He was treated and he recovered, but at 30, with a brain tumor, he decided that it was time to take a break from this, and he moved to Illinois, where a bunch of his family was living. He sold the entirety of the business to Dan Liebhauser. If that name is familiar to anybody, it would be because of Country USA. In 1969, Dan started working with Target Productions as A&R for essentially country music. And then it took over the business, and it essentially just became rep for a country artist named Glenn Cass, originally from the Green Bay area. He was able to release a few albums for Glenn under the new label and put him on TV. Glenn had his own show on WFRV for a couple of years. We'll get to that one. There are a few remaining clips that some friends of Glenn's had put together and posted on YouTube of not only him, but also Jerry from Speedy and the Alka-Seltzers, who became his bass player, and a lady named April Walker, who has a fairly storied music career herself in Wisconsin. This, on better days, when this area is cleaner, is part of the transfer setup that I have running at my house. The turntable is obviously connected to my computer. I'm able to swap out different sizes of needles, different platter surfaces. It's quite an involved process to move a record into the digital domain because it's never going to be perfect. And it's something that I've struggled with for years working on this, is none of these records, even in the best of conditions, are essentially high fidelity recordings. And they're never going to sound like they're being played in front of you. But some of the results have been very, very, very good. The thing that I played at the very beginning, the very crackly, skipping sound of the Friends, this is a friend of mine in Green Bay who, on the side, runs a business professionally cleaning records using ultrasonic technology. And I had him go through very, very gently, because these are incredibly fragile discs, and clean those before I started doing my transfers. The interesting thing about these, if anybody's ever seen what's called an acetate, is it's not a record like you think of a piece of plastic with a label baked or glued onto it. It's an aluminum platter with a very, very fine coating of lacquer, and it's physically cut with a diamond needle to essentially write the record from nothing. And they really only get a handful of good plays before they start deteriorating, and it becomes mostly surface noise. So we're very fortunate that even though it wasn't in the most perfect shape, it wasn't played a lot by the band before they essentially just put it in the closet. And that is the process of getting it through the system. Because of the skips, if you believe it, I actually had to run it forwards and backwards several times to try to see if the groove walls would allow the parts that skip to play in the other direction. And then you just reverse the audio in the computer and then start slotting it in. I was able to capture a couple of these tapes. As I started filling out the box of singles for Target and running out of opportunity to talk to people because of work and everything else, we started a little side project for Rockin' Around the Valley, and that is Kel Records of Oshkosh. It's a very short-lived entity operated by the DeCiani family, mostly to release records by by his sons. They went under the name Sunstone Lollipop. But these were some small 3-inch reels of an interview on WBAY with one of the other artists, talking to Mike McKenna, and then a little demo on accordion, because turns out Kelly DiCiani's main instrument was accordion, of some songs that he had written for this artist, and a little Christmas greeting, which I've also put up on the website, and around every Christmas I'll link that as the main story, so everybody gets a little Christmas message. This is Ronnie Fuller. If you he's from Shawano. If you want to hear his story, I recommend buying his son's book. It's fascinating. It's a fairly quick read. It's very concisely written. It's also quite tragic. But the interesting thing that we have from Ronnie was the record he did was backed by the Green Bay Symphony Orchestra. This would be 1970. His book mentions 2 separate songs that were recorded at the session, but the record that was released was one song, and the instrumental backing is the B-side. And a weird connection is Alan Ives, the writer and one of the singers in Friends. One of his distant relatives was the director of the Green Bay Symphony Orchestra and did this arrangement. And they crammed all these guys into 315 South Blue Mound, 47-piece symphony orchestra. And this wasn't technology anywhere near like we have now. The best they had at that place was a 4-track Ampex tape recorder, and almost everything that came out was in mono. So we'll move ahead past the 80s, past the 90s. At that point, a lot of people had forgotten about this stuff and moved on. It existed in its time, it did its thing. It had been replaced. Irish Sax Studios existed in the 70s and 80s, did most of the same thing that Target was doing. In the 90s, we had Mark Goldie launch Rock Garden Studios, and that still exists today. Doing again, vocal recordings, jingles. But where is everybody now? You know, these people didn't disappear with Target. They're still out there. These are the guys from Syndicate of Sound in Oshkosh, just a couple years ago, still playing. Some of you might remember Champagne Charlie's at the old Gibson. Wilbur Vandenberg was a big Cajun food aficionado and opened that restaurant. Well, back in the 60s,
Bass player in the Pharaoh.
he was playing bass with the Pharaohs. He engineered and produced at Target lots of these recordings. Some of the best ones came from his hands and ears. That was about 5 years ago. I went down to Sauk City to see Jim Kirchstein give a Q&A and sat down with him and a copy of the Catalina's First 45. Bob's in. When Bob left the Catalinas, he started Bob's Inn, and Bob's Inn is still going with his family. We've got some celebrities in the audience right now. These are Harry Wheelock's family. They're still out playing. This is Rick Timmers. This is one of Bob's sons. He played in some bands in the 90s. Boris the Sprinkler. He's currently traveling, but lives outside of the state right now. Still an active musician himself. Jerry Lakes, just retired from live performance in 2019 from Speedy and the Alka-Seltzers. And this is one of the albums that the post-Target DBL Productions with Dan Liebhauser did, and this is the original Speedy and the Alka-Seltzers 45. Written, by the way, by Ricky Lee. Then you got Dave Steffen, and he will forever be that guy to me. Nothing on stage but pure energy and amazing talent. And this is Beverly Moss.
Oh, how'd you get that?
So let me tell you a little story. If you Google hard enough, you can find anything. I found Beverly Moss. He still performs. He does musical theater. He does a semi-burlesque 50s review with a big fake Elvis pompadour. He's the sweetest man. And last year, I was able to mail him a copy of his record and a record player because he didn't have either. And now he's collecting records. It's contagious. But that was maybe, of all the things that I've done and discovered so far, was my proudest moment, was being able to give a piece of his life back to him. No one had talked to him about it for 50 years. I've got stories in some of my books from the 90s where people had tracked down other people from the bands and Bob Timmers and talked to them, but no one had gone looking for Beverly. Passion Beauty Salon, 2188 South Memorial. That was Al Rollo's Kimball organ studio. AutoZone. That was where concerto music was. Needle Freaks Tattoo on North Douglas. Target's first standalone studio. Right before they moved in, I happened to be going to search out these locations and met the owners, and they actually let me walk through the building before they put everything in and take pictures of every room in the building, including the bathroom. Trust me, it makes sense. There's the Masonic Lodge on South Blue Mound, the most well-known of Target's facilities. Before COVID, the plan was to reach out to them and see if they would take me through the building so I could see what it looks like. That plan's still in progress. This is the house on Bell Street where the Posniaks grew up. It's still there. And then there's Al. Al spent the rest of his life in Illinois and passed away from a heart attack in 2000. He wasn't much older than my dad when he died, which is weird. I never met him. I didn't start working on this till 13 years after he was gone. And as of yesterday, he was 40 years older than me. I've been to visit him several times, just to say thank you.
Is he buried here in Wisconsin or in Illinois?
He is buried in the Moses Montefiore Cemetery over by Appleton Medical off of Meade. Yeah, off of Meade in East Wisconsin.
North of Appleton.
Yep. He and his father both right when you walk in, if you want to go leave some flowers or say hello, he's right there. Just a few last little housekeeping things as I finish up. So this is just a little snapshot of the front page of our website. If you want to go listen to the music that we have, it's very, very simple. Just go to rockandroundthevalley.com. There are flyers and cards over here on the table. From the main page, right underneath the banner, you have Blog Home, which will take you right back to the front page. And then the Rock and Music Archive. It's clever, I know. Click on that, and you'll get to this page here, and it takes you to all the different eras of all the recordings that we have available on the site. Everything prior to the first Target release, going back to Rock and Roll Settles, and actually there's even a transfer of a 78 on there. One of the artists that recorded for Target was doing country music into the early 50s, and I should change that, it should say 1952. Every record Target released, the 3 albums that Al Rollo produced with Eddie Hansen, the Glenn Cass and Jerry Lake's era of DBL, and then, oh there it is, all the other music from all the artists that did record there. And when you click on one of those sections, you'll have the listing of the band and both tracks. Eventually, and again, I still have lots to do, and I'm essentially doing it on my own, you'll be able to click on these and also search from a different main page and get full bios and any photographs I'm able to find, along with tour itineraries. I'm not collecting ads for nothing. If I can build up a listing of the shows they played and where they played, it's going on there. If I can find it, I'm going to give it.
Which Target's 45s are you missing? Which 3?
The 3 I'm missing are Varsity Club Song by the Golden Catalinas. I am missing a single on TP by an Appleton band called The Hinge, a very furry psychedelic record called Idols of Your Mind. And the other side is just a Rascals cover. And the last one I'm missing, I believe I have pictures of, because it's the one that came via New Jersey. So there's interesting things I found out about that record specifically. It's called the Varsity Club Song because it was recorded essentially as an advertisement for the Varsity Club in lacrosse. The band was playing on tour in that area, and essentially on a whim just wrote this song about how it's a great place to go hang out and come out and sing and dance. It's a fun song, it's a great track, but it put a lot of people for a lot of years thinking that the Catalinas were from La Crosse. Because right on the label it says recorded live at the Varsity Club in La Crosse, Wisconsin. This is the last record I'm missing. I found a review, of all things, a review of this nobody, essentially obscure Wisconsin record on rateyourmusic.com. And I wrote to the person that reviewed it just going, okay, how do you know about this? Who are you? And can you help me? And he's a collector and part-time DJ in New Jersey, and he somehow ended up with a copy at some point and was able to send me scratchy, crackly MP3s of both sides of the record. Again, familiar names, Gary Lobbs. The band Beast with misspelled Rick Deasing. Rick is still playing out in central Wisconsin. His group is called the Strat Cats. It's just 2 guys on electric guitar. And I was supposed to go out and meet him right before COVID. So that's just been picking at me for 2 years now. But I'm definitely going out to talk to him. Every record has a story. Not just these, but every record that's ever been made. But these are amazing. Here's the story of Beast. They couldn't sell these to save their lives. They pressed 500 copies of it, and he ended up sitting on them for 15, 20 years. and then using them for target practice. I can account for 5 copies of this record. 5. And I've been looking for 8 years. That's probably one of the craziest. The other would be a band from Green Bay that won a Battle of the Bands, the Journeymen. This one's, you'll love this. So here's the Journeymen. 5 guys, maybe 19, 20 years old. Battle of the Bands, win the Battle of the Bands. The prize for the Battle of the Bands, 8 hours of studio time, gratis. All right, let's go make a record. On their way there, they go, we don't have a B-side. A single has 2 sides, ladies and gentlemen. So on the way there, they write a second song. Record the record, and then are told, studio time was what was free. If you want to make the record, you have to pay for it. So they scrape together the money they have, they get their record made. Well, 4 of them scrape their money together, and the 5th one doesn't want to pay for it. So what do you think happens? They don't divide them up between the 4 other guys. They take his 1/5 and smash them. They just take them out to the backyard, boom, gone. That record costs $300 today. And it's not the most expensive of these. I mentioned the acetate process and answer records. I have that too. A collector in Green Bay was able to find posters and a writer contract and that answer record, and now we are taking care of it, and it'll be going to the university. A couple more things up here. I've ended up with lots, like as in piles of things. Bands I can't find any information about. Don't know their names, don't know when they existed, don't know who they are. I grew up on London Street. Maybe? When you're looking through paperwork, no reason to stop before you get to the yearbooks. There's Gary Lobbs, graduating from Menasha High School before 1971.
Your great uncle is right underneath.
That's how I found him. Robert Lamb is my great uncle. And just looked up. Was looking for Robert Lamb and looked up and there's Gary Lobbs. Like, who knew? Not everybody that Target had put out a record. There's Ricky Lee again.
Rick Gertz is in the middle of the flag pants.
Rick Gertz is wearing, yep.
He got kicked out of Einstein Junior High for one day.
There you go. Yeah, he was in the memories, wasn't he?
Private property.
He was in Private Property. So was Gary Shabilsky.
Yes, Gary still plays.
Yep. But they were under Target Productions. These were actually the guys that were recording the day that the Post Crescent came and took their pictures. That record never came out. That tape is somewhere. Lots of tapes are somewhere. Yeah, it's kitsch. The rest were from Milwaukee. They recorded this entirely goofy single at Target, and it got placed with Tower Records through Capitol and went national. This is a foldable pinback advertising the record. It got lost in the mail.
Somebody has it.
Yep, the eBay seller sent it to one of their other buyers by accident and didn't bother to try to get it back for me because it was like $3. Haven't seen another one yet. In fact, this is the only picture. I haven't found another one even mentioned. There's a Love Society record from France. Who would have thought? The other stuff that came out through this series, through Vogue, is stuff like The Doors and Butterfield Blues Band, like big artists, and they latched on to the Love Society single. Funny thing about this photograph, it was taken from inside the house, and they sprayed water down the window. In the last handful of years, as everything's gone digital, a lot of old newspaper archives have been liquidated. And that includes places like the Milwaukee Journal. I've been able, by just watching eBay and a couple of places that essentially deal in those, I have an original 8x10 that they used to put this picture in the journal. Thank you so much for listening to me talk.
You got trouble on the brain, so many people hang around you, baby. Oh, you got yourself to blame now. I want you to tell me what's the matter with you. Yeah, baby, what's the matter? You know I got you on my mind. You got the